Local authorities have borne one of the greatest burdens during the relentless recent pursuit of public sector savings. And they've also been under considerable pressure, of course, not to put up their council tax to ease that situation. The early signs in London are that many town halls will freeze their council tax next year. But in Kingston, they're also proposing a longer-term solution, as Andrew Cryan reports.
The coalition has cut grant funding for London's councils by nearly half, but at the same time say they don't want local authorities whacking up council tax to make up the difference.
Now, the government have got two main policies aimed at keeping council tax low. The first of them is that if a local authority wants to increase it by 2%, they have to hold a special referendum and let the public vote on it. The other policy is that if councils freeze it, they get a special bit of money, a special grant, which some cynical people have called a bribe. So the question is, has all of that worked?
Sunday Politics asked all of London's 33 local authorities what they proposed for council tax in the coming year. A third of councils don't know yet, but of those who do, all were going to freeze, except Hammersmith and Fulham, who are cutting it by 1%, and 6 boroughs going for an increase of up to 2%. Bromley, Havering, Lambeth, Barking and Dagenham, Harrow and Islington. But why is it that most councils don't feel they need the extra money? Kingston upon Thames is one of them.
Now, the local authority in this part of London has faced the biggest cuts of anyone at all. So by this financial year's end, it will be a 45% reduction in the grant it gets from central government. The next 4 or 5 years, it will be 75%. So, what does a local authority do when it's faced with that sort of reduction in budget?
Since last May, the council has been run by the Conservatives. But rather than complain about the cuts in grant, the leader here says he would rather, and wait for it, receive nothing at all from the government.
My ambition, rather, for the borough is that we can be independent from grant completely, that we can move away from a system where central government hands out monies to us and we have to spend it in the most reasonable way we can find. I want to see whether we can cut the grant completely, move away from it, give it back to government, in return for which they need to give us some freedoms and particularly give us a bit more of an uplift in business rates.
Business rates in Kingston could prove lucrative. This is one of London's prime shopping destinations, but the proposal to keep the money local isn't just pie in the sky. The council's civil servants have been working up the idea with the government.
Well, we're in conversation with them about it. They've not rejected it. It's obviously got a bit tangled up in the whole wider devolution debate. But I'm due to meet the Minister very soon, actually, because they've now done some analysis between our finance department and the DCLG. And let's hope we can find a way of moving it forward before the election.
The government say they're considering the idea.
Well, I mean, we want to talk to any council come up with innovative ways of actually reducing the burden upon the taxpayer. The Secretary of State, Eric Pickles, has been very clear that his ambitions are to enable councils to retain more and more of the business mates that they generate.
And according to one leading expert on local government in London, if it were to go ahead, it would make Kingston one of the most radical of all the London boroughs.
Well, there is an honourable tradition of Conservative authorities in London wanting to be seen to be radical. Westminster, Wandsworth, then perhaps Barnet, Hammersmith and Fulham, and now here we've got Kingston. The possibility that they could get free of government grant and simply sink or swim by their own efforts with council tax and business rates, it would be radical, and actually it would give them considerable consistency to plan.
But the Lib Dem opposition in Kingston think there may be problems with the idea.
If you take a town like Kingston, a borough like Kingston, or you take a Westminster of this world, who get large business rates, I can't see any central government not wanting that money for themselves to redistribute across the country.
But one thing does seem certain, and that's that in a culture where councils are only going to have less money in the future, local authorities in London are going to have to find increasingly radical solutions.
The view from Kingston there, and I'm joined now by Southwark's leader, Peter John, who sits on the executive of London Council, so we'll talk a bit locally and we'll talk a bit London-wide. You're freezing in Southwark, is that the plan?
That's right, for the 7th year in a row we'll be freezing council tax.
So this hasn't been, that bad a process, really, has it?
It's been a terrible process. I mean, we've lost something in the order of 120 million in real terms from our budget since 2010. As Andrew said in his report, 45% of government funding has been lost from all councils across London. It's a huge amount of money. but local government has risen to the challenge. We've been innovative. We've set balanced budgets, and we've carried on providing services.
But that's a good process for the people of London and the people of Southwark. It's a terrible process for you, presumably because you weren't applying these kind of savings methods or forensic cost-cutting techniques before.
Well, look, I mean, I think the point I'd make is that the fact that councils have been able to deliver these savings over the last 5 years demonstrates, that you can be innovative, you can do more with less. And I think the challenge is for other public services to do the same as local government has done. And actually for the government to trust local government with a lot more in terms of bringing efficiencies and finding savings in public spending. More joined up thinking, actually.
So would you say that there was any sense of a kind of political unity here? You look at the Conservative leader at Kingston asking, what he's asking for, and that freedom. Would that work for Southwark eventually? Would you want to see the same thing there?
Well, we're in a very different position.
Yeah.
I think Kingston's grant is something in the order of £12 million from government. Ours is in the region of £200 million because of the differences in deprivation and the different considerations that we have in our borough. And so it's a different story across London.
But I think is the point you still
solutions.
you still argue that actually if the central government wants to see a lot more cutting, and we're told it's going to be an even harder phase for you over the next 2 or 3 years, that is a solution and answer for you, if you find more creative solutions, if you had more control of your own money?
We've been incredibly creative. Yes, I'm not going to say we shouldn't have more control, but what I do say is that if you look at what local government has done and you think about giving greater responsibilities, say over the health service to local government, I think we can provide efficiencies and new ways of doing things which will be, real savings to the public purse. You can't carry on cutting and cutting and cutting local government and thinking there's going to be no impact. There will be an impact at the end of the day. Fortunately, we haven't seen anything terrible so far, but that can't carry on.
Stephen Hammond, it's been a terrible process.
Well, it's been a process that every part and everybody in this country was faced with a financial crisis 6-7 years ago caused by the Labour government. Everybody's had to bear some of that pain. And it's no good Karen tutting. The fact of the matter is her government ran a structural deficit for 10 years and then there was a financial crisis in the world on top of that. So everybody had to bear some pain. What is interesting, I think, is the number of councils around London have been innovative, and Peter John's council has been one of them. There have been a number of councils that are not being so innovative. And yes, it has been a difficult process, but it's actually made local government much more efficient. It continues in many areas to deliver the frontline services. London councils at the moment sit on 600 million of reserves which are unallocated. In total, London councils have £3 billion of reserves in their pot at the moment. What? Some of that could be used for services. In my own borough, sorry Tim, in my own borough, they're actually cutting frontline services this year, and yet they sit on over 100 million of reserves.
Help me why a borough which has a lot of reserves, we're told, like Conservative-controlled Bromley, long regarded as a model borough, wants to raise its council tax just below that 2% threshold to avoid a referendum. Why are they saying effectively to central government, you're not giving us enough money?
Well, I don't know that. I suspect I hope what they're doing is going to have another look at that, because there's no need for them. In all sorts of areas, particularly, choose my own Labour council, they've taken the money for the government to freeze council tax, which is good for my local constituents, claiming it for their own. In fact, it was George Osborne who's been doing this. We have 100 million in reserves, as I say, in Wimbledon and Merton. And yet we're cutting frontline services like adult education and some of the help to the most vulnerable. That is not acceptable, and that could still be sorted out.
Karen Buck, the warnings, the dire warnings of the effect of these cuts were alarmist. It's just patently clear, isn't it now?
Well, I think we only need to look at what's happening in the health service to know that in terms of social care, we are about to hit a very serious problem, and I'll come back to that. But
let's talk about what's happened up to now, and remember the dire warnings that Labour offered.
There have been some very, very painful cuts in spending been made by, as Peter said, in Southwark and in many other places. And I mean, it's clearly not the case that the financial crisis of 2008 was caused because we were providing too much social care. Now,
where's the really undue pain been? Services haven't collapsed, have they, by any means?
Well, I think if you look at social care, you can see some very difficult things are going on now, and we actually have to take some very radical decisions. And if we form a government, we're going to have to take that radical decision of integrating the health and social care budget, because in my hospital, for example, they're telling me at any given time there is a whole ward of patients who cannot be discharged from hospital because there simply isn't social care.
Again, in which case, if we're going to try and face that challenge, we need to have made some really hard decisions over the last few years. They have been made, and they have not led to dire collapse of services.
I think what's absolutely true is that local authorities have demonstrated an incredible discipline and effectiveness in the way that they worked. And we've seen, for example...
Well, actually, no, under Labour, it implies that under Labour they were getting far too much money, doesn't it? And when they bothered to look, they realised that they could get rid of it.
They were doing a lot of this very, very good work for years and years before that. But we've seen, for example, this week, Hammersmith is able to remove its social care charges at the same time as making a 1% cut in council tax. So I think local authorities have to be congratulated for taking very, very tough decisions. But there is no doubt we're going to have to do some radical action in the coming years.
Stephen Hammond, dying to come in. Have a wrap up for us on this section.
Well, if the Labour Party was so concerned about social care, I'm staggered they didn't vote for the £5 billion social care fund.
You can say that's not going to be a problem, it's not a challenge.
Of course it's a challenge, but I'm saying if you're so concerned about it, why didn't you actually join the non-political solution and vote for the money?
Tell the people of Merton, tell the people of your constituency that they are going to get the same level of care in out-of-hospital care and domiciliary services and so on.
What they should be asking the leader of my Labour council is, quite rightly, he's taking the money to freeze council tax, which is absolutely, and I applaud, and we should be doing. But why is he sitting on 100 million of reserves and cutting frontline services? And he is doing that. You can see that in the money. And there is, and I'm afraid, of course they have to keep reserves, Karen, but they do not have to keep 100 million.
Peter?
So there are unallocated reserves in London at the moment. Local London councils are sitting on 600 million.
Peter, lots to get through. I'm not going to be able to let you come back on this today.
No way.
Peter, another time.
Invite me back to talk about reserves.
I will do. We'll be following your progress closely. Thanks very much indeed.